we're going to call this meeting to order. First up, we've got a new seat. I will let our newest board member introduce herself.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Trisha. Here. Hi, can you hear me now? I'm normally pretty loud, so I don't need a mic. My name is Trisha Hirschfeld. I'm a lawyer in Nashville. Been practicing for 25 years or something. I was on the Davidson County Election Commission before this, so the accommodations are much nicer, and I appreciate the welcome music. Thanks.
That's a great seat, by the way. There's lots of camera action.
I've heard this is the best.
It is. It made me do my hair every morning.
Oh, good. Keep an eye on that.
So first item on the agenda is the public comment period pursuant to the Tennessee Open Meetings Act. Do we have anybody that wants to address the board? Awesome. Seeing none, we will move straight over to the approval of February's meeting minutes. I hope everybody's had a good chance to look at them. It's my bedtime reading for me. Is there a motion to approve February's minutes?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion to approve from Caitlin, second from Mr. Granberry. Any discussion? Hey, Nate. We're making a vote for February's minutes. Any discussion from you since you just got here, Nate, in your hot seat?
No. Right, yeah.
Okay, so all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Next up is considering approval of the inclement weather policy. Let's call our CEO, Mr. Penn.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here, and apologies for the traffic. I hope to say that it'll get better, but it's probably going to get worse for a few more months. There's quite a bit happening in the footprint. The next item on the agenda is kind of a rudimentary, perfunctory thing, but it's something that we thought was beneficial to have written down, an inclement weather policy. Rather than will they, won't they, what's the plan, what are we going to do? We worked on pulling together what the Sports Authority does as well, which is basically they observe Metro Nashville Public Schools. The only outlier there will be during the summer. If there is an event during the summer, Lord willing, we don't have that problem. But if there is, we'll have to adopt or be flexible in that space. And so right now, this is the verbiage that we have put together and had reviewed and spoken to. So this is up for comment and adoption by the board.
I move to adopt.
Second.
Okay, so that is a motion to adopt from Mr. Tiff and a second from Ms. Hertfield. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Awesome, motion carries. Next up is our EBDA procurement policy.
So good morning. As you can see, I have asked a couple of additional staff to join. Michelle Scopel, who is our Director of Program Management, and Saul Solomon, who has been working with us directly on these policies. And so what we'll kind of talk through is, as a reminder, we are looking at, these are our current contracts. One little bit of update. The bottom contract, which you voted on last board meeting, is actually complete. And so that work is substantively complete. And so that is our first tick off the box that we had to do. We completed our own procurement, our own PO. We set up our own contracts and went through the process and have delivered the project now. So a little bit of a good news. The others are the contracts that we all have talked about for months and months. So I won't belabor that. As you may or may not be aware, we have the ability to set up our own procurement, which will allow us to further establish our own autonomy as a board and an authority that would give us the strength to stand on our own 2 feet and do our own procurement, our own finances, et cetera, et cetera. And so in that vein, we started looking at various boards and commissions and business units within the Metro Davidson County area, as well as the state. And so, as you can see here, these are the agencies that we worked with. We talked through kind of the formatting of that and kind of what the conversations were, what they learned. One of the big ones was the Convention Center Authority. Much like us, they were very construction heavy and construction oriented in their inception. And then they moved into an operations status. And so just like this board, we will move from a heavy construction A&E focus into a more operational. And so we will have to have procurement that allows for operational needs as well. And so that was a huge lesson learned there. And then so just moving that through. So as you see here, we have this what and how conversation throughout the entire, it's a little bit convoluted. But it was the basis for how we interpreted and worked through. The procurement policy before you today is the what. What is procurement? What are the types of procurements we intend? What are the terms with which we intend to do procurement as an agency? We will follow it up with a sister document, which we'll talk about more in a minute, in the future, that will be at a staff level, that will be a child companion to this document, that will go through a lot more of the how do we conduct our business on a day-to-day basis and how do we implement the what that is the policy. And so with that being said, I'll turn it over to Michelle, who has done a lot of the heavy lifting on the conversation thus far.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I think we've mentioned this in the last board meeting or two, that we're doing some due diligence on that. We did have conversations with really every entity that was listed and received amazing advice. And we've taken a lot of that advice, which is something I've learned over my years, to take the advice of others who've gone through this process. So one of them is to separate a policy and a guideline. And so that, with us being in our infancy stage as a authority, this was something that I think we really did spend a lot of time focusing on the what. And so what you see before you is, I say it's simple, although it did not feel simple, creating that. and we certainly could touch more on all of that, but we really focused on the different types of procurement, the different types of contracts, things that we would be seeing that we anticipate, and allow for the guidelines to develop as we grow. And that's going to be able to, we can add in the operations, the things that we learn along the way. We can do that. This also focuses on the roles and responsibilities. So you'll kind of see, if you look through there, the expectations of the board, the expectations of the CEO, contracting officer, all of these things as we grow. And so we tried really hard to piece this together in a way that was setting us up for success. We do also think that, we have a piece on here about protests and appeals. I've worked in and around Metro for a long time. Protests happen a lot on solicitations, and it's just part of the process. So we just needed to document, here's how we think we will do this. And then, of course, the guidelines will give us an opportunity to develop that as we grow. So that's a good thing. And then, of course, the contracts that you see here, the RFPs, requests for proposals, the RFQs for qualifications, those are things that we anticipate starting with. We've talked a little bit about having an RFQ, some qualifications for various things, engineering services, construction services, and have a handful of great qualified teams with an IDC so that we could pull from. We've also talked about unique situations, which, the whole East Bank is kind of a unique situation. So we definitely wanted to put something in the policy for that, to if something that we come across that is not directly addressed in the policy, that we have a plan for that. Again, the guideline is something that we will continue to grow from. Really, what we would like today, we would like for you all to consider adopting this policy. This does not necessarily mean that we are going to go hit the ground running. We still have some steps to do after this. So this is sort of the first step, which is partly why we separated this out into the policy and the guideline piece. The guideline is the how. And we'll kind of get into the nitty gritty on a lot of these things, specifically how we plan to review RFPs, how we plan to work through various different, contracting structures, contracting types, how we plan to work with small business and DBE practices. We're going to be able to really develop that as we go. So that was intentional for us to kind of lay out the framework with the policy that we can hopefully adopt, and then we can develop this as we go. One of the things that we talked about as we were spending a lot of time reviewing this and thinking this through, we do want to ask the board to consider like a policy reevaluation in a couple of years. We are planning to learn as we go, all of us, you too. And so this gives a chance for us to kind of revisit this policy in a couple of years. And if we need to add anything or revise, we can at that time. But the guidelines will really be the next step. Once we can get through the framework of what it is that we need to do, we will spend a lot of time developing the how and the guidelines. And that's something that we'll share once we get through that process. We've started this, of course, but we still have quite a bit to do there. And then our next steps are, having ourselves set up so that we can procure with our policy, with our guidelines. We are still, leaning on Metro, leaning our partners to help us as we continue to grow. You remember, I think Ben mentioned we're still looking for a finance person. So we still need some things to fully be completely on our own. But we do want to set ourselves up so that we can follow our own policy, our own contracts, and our own vendors as well. So that's our goal for today.
Yeah, and there are several things kind of procedurally that have to occur, kind of ITS and finance world, that set us up as our own business unit and kind of set us apart and kind of wall us off from Metro. And that goes back to that autonomy piece that we're really trying to get towards here. And so it's not, as Michelle said, it won't be, if this is adopted, our RFQ will hit the street tomorrow. It's that kind of procedurally step-by-step process that we need to incur in order to get to the place where we can drop our first RFQ. So,
but with that said, we do want to. We're very motivated because we have, as you know, a lot of work coming up. And so I think we're all excited and feel it's important to be able to have our own policy, have our own plan, have our own contracts. And so we're very eager to get to that point so that we can begin the work.
Thank you very much. Is there any discussion before, or do we want to go straight to making a motion?
I just got a question for Ben and Michelle. When different bids go out, as we all sit on this authority, some people might not care as much. Will we be able to get to see the bid process and the people that's applying for the bids?
So define the we, is that the board? Would the board? I think that's a conversation we can have. I think that ultimately it would depend on where you want to be in the process. Do you want to be in the we've worked through, we've come to you with a list of the selected surveyors? Let's just say we're looking for surveyors, and we come to you with 8 people applied and put in for the RFP or the RFQ, and we came back to the board with the top 2 or 3. Is that where you want to see it, or is it like?
Yeah, that's cool. As long as we're in the process of knowing.
Yeah, that's kind of the intent. Is before award, the board would make their appointment.
Cool.
There's also there'll be a selection committee with each of these pieces, and so we could consider having someone from the board participate on that selection committee if that's possible or desired.
And I think that's where, when we get into the guidance document, we can formalize a little bit more of that structure in the selection committees.
I'm just curious, is the $50,000, is that a threshold that's sort of a best practice across Metro, or where does that number come from?
It's usually you find between 25 and 50. 50's common, 25 is also common, so that's pretty normal. Yes.
And I have a clarifying question on that too. With the indefinite delivery contracts, how do you see that working in this construction phase? And that small purchase threshold, is that 50,000, is that per engagement on indefinite delivery contract or for the whole contract?
So the way typically we would intend to use it is if we put an IDIQ contract for, well, I'll just pick on surveyors again. If we put an IDIQ contract for $500,000 for a surveyor work, and we selected 2 contracts that had 2 survey teams, we would select both of those with $500,000 ceiling on their contract, and then we would bill, invoice, PO against that $50,000 umbrella, or $500,000
Okay.
umbrella, and that would be under the limit and thus working, because you've already approved the contract, it would just be setting out POs against that.
Okay.
And so once the board approved the general language in the contract, then we would go in and do invoices against it.
And just to kind of piggyback on that, looking at construction, because that's what you asked specifically about, we do anticipate having an IDC for construction services, and it's going to be a qualification. So, I mean, when we have large projects that we will bid specific projects, that's a request for proposal on a specific scope of work. But a qualifications, an RFQ, we will be looking for, and we'll set this out in the scope of work. Of course, this will get refined as we go, but something along the lines of a specific scope of works, all kinds of services with unit pricing, and similar to what we were able to piggyback on for the work that we just did at Sylvan Street. That was a RFQ qualifications with NDOT. There were 3 contractors, and we were actually able to still competitively bid among those 3. We could also, if we have, say, 3 qualified contractors that make it through that process and we have them on hand, we could either rotate, we could discuss what's the best way to do this, to set this up. I do think this is going to be for probably, small to moderate projects. When we have really large projects, I'm pretty sure we will bid that out with an RFP of some sort, to keep that competitive. But it's a great idea, and it's a great practice to have a handful of qualified teams, because it's usually just a team that's put together for various services. So it's a really good idea to have that. We've already got our standards, we've already got our expectations laid out in our contract terms. So that's kind of our plan for that.
Yeah, could you explain paragraph 4D, the first paragraph? It kind of jumps around a little bit on the threshold.
Yeah, 4D.
Which one is that?
First paragraph.
It's this one.
It's approval authority on procurement activities.
Yeah, we bounced around with that several times ourselves. We were looking at various ways to structure that. And we've talked with various people. We're trying to decide what the correct window is to bring contracts back to you. Like last meeting, we had a $27,000 contract. I mean, obviously, that's kind of a smaller, and we don't want to waste your time and bog down these meetings with a myriad of $27,000 contracts. We want to have a threshold there that can be adopted at the staff level. And we've looked at $1 million being that line in the sand. Everything below that could be done at the CEO level or below as their designee, or at the contracting officer. And so there's kind of that. There's a conversation in there to be had. Is that $1 million the right number, or is it that $500,000 line?
And just to add some perspective to that, you all looked at the Interstate Drive, the NES and ITS Duck Bank, which you all approved. That work that's occurring right now on Interstate Drive, that's above that threshold. So, just for perspective, a lot of the underground heavy infrastructure work is probably going to fall outside of that $1 million, which we'd have to come back before you. But we do anticipate quite a bit of streetscape work and quite a bit of other things to help execute the next step of work. And so that's the kind of thing that, we're able to move quickly if we can with this practice.
And that specific section in and of itself kind of lays in the $1 million would be approvable by EBDA staff. Between $1 million and $500,000 would only be approved by the CEO. And then below that would be at the contracting officer, which will be defined in the guidance document. So it could be the finance or the program management director.
I would just encourage you, it seemed it's sort of all, it's a little bit of a word salad.
Okay,
I mean, you say you delegated approval authority, but you don't say to who.
okay,
And, I would just pick a number, pick 500,000. That's what it's at airport.
okay,
Just pick anything above 500,000 comes to the board, anything under 500.
okay.
Business. You still tell us about it, but you've already,
Like put it in a chart kind of
you've
thing,
already
maybe.
proceeded on and showed how you got to the who you selected. You follow all the same procedures. You move on.
Okay.
It's informational only.
Okay, that's great feedback. Yeah, absolutely. I could see how that would be helpful. Something like a chart where, because I think it's listed, but you're right, it's a little bit of a.
That one
word
paragraph
salad.
is kind of,
Yeah.
Mhm. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Saul must have written.
He was giving Trisha a hard time about being in trouble, and then he's yelling from the background.
Paul's really in trouble. What was the basis or reasoning behind a 3-year review versus perhaps 1 or 2, considering it's kind of a new process?
Yeah, and that's. I mean, we can change it to 2. There's nothing written in stone about that. We could change it to 1. We just wanted to give ourselves enough of a sample size so that it's not we're coming back in 12 months and it's like, well, we've done 1, and it's like, well, that's not a small sample size. So we didn't want to do 5 because that felt like it was too big a window. So we thought 3 was a happy kind of medium. At the board's direction, we could do 2, whatever you feel. So.
To add to that, though, we still have the partnership and really, thankfully, partnership with Metro to execute a lot of the procurement piece of it. So it may very well take more than 1 year for us. I mean, it's probably going to take more than 1 year for us to have that wall created to where we're fully on our own, just realistically. So we can look at addressing this as often as you want, I think, but it specifically when we're at the point where we can create that wall and truly be self-sufficient, I think that's a great time to take that revisit. Thanks.
I'm deciding what I want to say. I think that a lot of great discussion. Some of the things that make a lot of sense to me was not only the list that Mr. Greenberry discussed with that 500 to 1 million items, but the policy evaluation, obviously, yes, that we can make a motion to call it for discussion at any time. But the thing that's the most curious to me is what is our strategic plan that we kind of talked about? Like by this milestone date, we want to be at this point in construction. We want to have made introductions to these projects. And so that's going to kind of give us that information of if we think that we're going to be hitting a lot of contracts. And so maybe if it's not the next meeting, let's hit a milestone sometime in the next couple of months where we can say, hey, these are the projects that we're thinking are going to come. And so that way we'll have a better assessment of if 2 years or 3 years is more appropriate, and we'll get a better understanding for these are all $1 million plus items or whatever, and that we can have a better comfort level. I think the goal is for, as we are developing the board, is to have some standard operating procedures so that we have some North Star kind of things, and we're not all scrambling while we're trying to make decisions. And so it makes a lot of sense to have something in place so we all understand how the decisions are being made, regardless of if we want to come back and say, hey, let's not do that again next time. So with that being said, is there a motion to approve this procurement policy? Is that what we're doing? Yes.
Just one clarification. Mr. Granberry mentioned that right now there's $1 million that's below $1 million. Did you want to change the 500,000? I guess is the question.
Yeah, I guess that is a good clarification. Okay.
We
So,
can look that up. So with
board
that
approval
change,
above 500? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Motion to approve as amended.
Second.
Motion to approve by Mr. Granberry as amended, second by Ms. Daskew. Yes.
Discussion.
Yes. Is there any discussion?
Just following off what Jimmy said and looking at the actual language, also maybe part of the problem with this is using the acronym EBDA instead of the board. Like in other parts of this, it says board, and I think EBDA would be defined to include staff also. So maybe in revising this paragraph, say so essentially say the board has delegated approval authority.
That's right.
And then within the 500,000.
Okay.
That's
I think that's
absolutely
part
right.
of the confusion.
That
It's this paragraph we were looking at on 10.
That's exactly
Yep.
right. 4D.
So instead of saying the EBDA has delegated, it would say the board has delegated.
That was Michelle's fault.
Yes, it is. I'll take it. You know, I'm learning as we go. Thanks all.
You too, that's right.
Any further discussion? Okay, so that's two amendments.
Yep.
Do we need to update the motion?
I believe so,
That's
yes.
the motion as amended.
Second again.
Okay, awesome. All opposed, all in favor?
Hi.
All opposed? Perfect. The motion carries.
Thanks, Chelsea.
Good job.
Thank you. Good job. Thank you. Appreciate it.
The next item on the agenda is an informational presentation on the master development agreement.
Yeah, so I'm going to have Tom Cross, Metro Legal, join Saul and I at the table. Tom's going to walk us through a couple of points in the procedural on the MDA, and then I'll hit some of the rent calculation coordination.
So there was a fair amount of discussion a couple of meetings ago about how the process works for figuring out what the rent is, and this is the most complicated paragraph on rent that I have seen in all of the complicated contracts that I've reviewed. The rent is based on property values, and the property values are established at the beginning of the process. We've spent about a year getting to the point where we have this piece completed as of yesterday, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in just a second. The MDA, the Master Development Agreement, calls for the parties to jointly hire an appraiser to evaluate each of the parcels in the initial development area for several different potential uses, residential, income-restricted residential, hotel, retail, office. I may be forgetting one. But the process is supposed to produce a sort of a matrix that shows what the property values are depending on what use is ultimately put to. And for hotels, it's based on the number of room keys. For everything else, it's based on the number of rentable square feet. And rentable square feet is not, Jimmy's probably going to correct me here at some point, maybe Brian too, but rentable square feet is not actual square feet. The rentable square feet is a reduction from actual square feet based on things like where the elevators are and stairs and whatever other games the developer can play to get that number down as far as possible. So we engaged an appraiser who went through this process. Fallon and Metro did not agree on the conclusions on a couple of specific items, and so we eventually agreed to hire another appraiser to sort of do take a second look at the process. And we still were not in full agreement, and so the last, I would say, 3 months or so, we have been working with Fallon to try to resolve those. I wouldn't even say they rose to the level of disputes, but disagreements about things informally. And as I say, as of yesterday, we finally did memorialize the agreements on these things in a third amendment to the development agreement. The three specific things that we had disagreements about had to do with how to calculate an appropriate rent for the affordable housing parcels. There are two of them. One of them, the board approved a pilot on at its last meeting. And you may recall, as part of that discussion, we had agreed that the rent, in lieu of rent for those two parcels, there would be an initial payment of $500,000. It's just not possible to finance those affordable housing projects without essentially nominal rent. Then every other residential building also has to have 10% of the units income restricted. We've reached an agreement about the appropriate reduction for that. That's memorialized in the amendment to the MDA. And the agreement there was a reduction in the per square foot value of 72 cents per affordable unit. The last thing as to which we worked with Alan to reach an agreement on had to do with responsibility for some infrastructure that needs to be done to support these developments and all the other things that are going on the property. The most expensive item is going to be the work on the pedestrian bridge that is really, it has to get underway almost immediately. Another piece of it had to do with the East Bank Boulevard and the segment that's adjacent to Parcel D. And the final thing was, well, at least on the Metro side, was Davidson Drive. Metro's going to cover the cost of those things. We're also going to cover the cost of some stairs that are referred to in the documents as the Cumberland Bluffs, a really nice way to get off the bridge far enough to the east for pedestrians to be safe during major events. And Fallon is going to initially pay for that, but we will reimburse them over the course of the first 40 years of the lease on Parcel D in the form of a rent credit. So if you look at I know that's a lot to take in, but if you look at the next page, you can see how the rent is actually calculated we've set the initial values for everything. This is applicable to everything except for the affordable housing parcels. You start with the initial values that we've agreed on. Then when they actually take the parcels down, which they will do over the course of time, those values are brought forward by CPI. So we're not stuck with a value that's no longer reasonable, say 10 years have passed. Then, so the rent is the CPI adjusted land value times the number of rentable square feet or the number of room keys, times the lease yield of either 4.5% or 4%, depending on whether it's a residential use or not. One of the later slides that Ben is going to cover shows sort of the range of rents that we can expect. And the formula is not that hard to apply, but it's still a little bit tricky because most of these buildings, if not all of them, will have retail on the ground floor. So even in the case of a hotel, which is the simplest math problem of all of these, you still have to factor in that there's retail space on the bottom, and that may have a different rate. The rents start when the developer has received a certificate of substantial completion for a property. So basically, they don't start paying rent until they have rent coming in. And then the rents also escalate over time, 2.5% for the first 10 years, and then there's a look back and a reset based on what average CPI has been in that first 10 years. And then that sort of, it's capped at 2.75%. Whatever that number is, applies for the next 10 years of escalation. There's also the possibility of participation rent that they would pay if they sell a building, which developers often do over the life of these, basically 100-year leases. And they would pay some participation rent of between 0.75% and 1% for either a sale or a cash out refinancing. That is a lot to take on board there, and I'll be happy to take questions. You may want to hear Ben's part first before you do.
Do you want to pause there and ask questions, or do you want to talk about the next two slides? You have them there.
Well, let's see if there's any questions.
Okay.
First off, because my eyes are.
I'll take responsibility for the glazing over there, but it is sort of a complicated formula.
What land value did you arrive at?
It varies based on use. So in some cases, they're $28, $29, $30 per rentable square foot. So it depends on what actually gets built. That's not if we just had the parcels appraised, which Metro did early in this process, it's, some of them are $5 or $6 million or were at the time for just the land value, but that's not what goes in here. I also need to make another comment. Mr. Sexton asked a question about how this was months ago, but it's sort of how this is related to the appraisals that the tax assessor does. They're completely unrelated. The only function of this land valuation process is to set the rents. This is not going to the assessor's office. They have their own processes for figuring out how things work.
Maybe I misunderstood you. If you based it on rentable square feet, the land value really is moot.
That's correct.
Okay.
I just wanted to point out that we had appraisals done when we were in the process of issuing the RFP that resulted in Fallon getting an award. But that's not how the process of determining the rent or the per per square foot value that goes into calculating the rent. It's not that they're unrelated.
Does the master agreement for the hotel properties have a range of room numbers that's required?
There's not a separate MDA for hotels. It's one MDA for everything. Each parcel is going to get, and maybe multiple buildings on each parcel, which is probably going to be the case. These are really big lots. Each one will have a separate ground lease. And you had a little bit of discussion at your last meeting about the ground lease for the first affordable housing property that's going to go up. There will be other structures built on that parcel too. That's parcel C. There will be other structures on there. They will have separate ground leases. And so some of the details about how the rent gets paid are in the ground leases. But to answer your question, no, the control over the size of the buildings, including hotels, is based on the zoning. This is now part of the so-called downtown code, which is, I think, a sort of confusing phrase, but their more height is allowable as you get farther from the river.
And the MDA does put parameters on the number of hotels and that kind of thing, but it doesn't state keys. It says number of hotels.
Yeah, I was just curious, and I'm the non-real estate person in here. Like, is that so? If a hotel chooses to build bigger rooms versus these smaller rooms, that will change the number of room keys, right? I mean, that's why I was wondering if there was any parameter that's like any hotel you build has to have at least 300 rooms, something like that, or okay.
Where does, when I'm looking at the list of potential uses, where does something like childcare fall into rent?
There is one childcare facility that is required, and that is in the building, that will be in the building, the affordable housing building that was the subject of discussion last time. That's the only one that's required.
Any additional would fall into just general retail that falls into each building.
Hey, Ben, question, you said we're giving them a 72-cent break on the affordable units. Is that what you said, Tom?
It's the break is as to the rent. It goes towards the calculation of the value of the property and ultimately to the rent. Yes, as a reduction of 72 cents per square foot per affordable units, or the number of affordable units in a building.
Okay. Does that allocate towards the end of a potential renter? Does that?
It does. That does affect the rent that they will pay. It reduces it pretty substantially.
Okay. Cool.
So, Tom, just for fun, when you do a hotel and its number of keys get to a value, how does that relate to the actual value of the land based on the appraisals?
I couldn't tell you for sure how the assessor does it. Is that what you're asking?
Well, I mean, if it's $5 million an acre and you do the room keys and you come up with a value, how does that relate based on the room keys? How does that relate back to the actual land value?
I don't think the assessor takes into consideration the number of room keys. I don't know how they evaluate the value of the buildings.
No. You that's how you're arriving at the rent. So
Yes.
I'm saying back into it just for fun and compare that to the actual land value that y'all started with years ago.
I haven't done that. Obviously, if you construct a really nice building on a piece of property, the value of the property and all of the properties that are nearby also increase. You might be able to do that on the back of an envelope, but I can't.
Just sort of talking out loud, I'm just wondering if by going this route, if we're leaving money on the table for the authority long term. Because if you had to go out, if Brian and I had to go out and buy the land, we'd pay X dollars an acre, right? And that's what we pro forma in our deal. So not just, I'm going to build this many rooms and that's going to drive the value. Does that make sense?
It does. Bodies like the East Bank Development Authority and Metro have such long time horizons that, if you look at the stream of rents that are likely to be produced from these properties, and I think that's something Ben's going to talk about, it's a huge number. It wildly exceeds, what you'd have to pay for the property and what you'd have to pay for the property and construction of the building over time.
You hope.
Right. That's a development, right?
Would it be from like a really basic calculation, like this many X number of years of rent payment would equal the initial value of the property? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
I'm just sort of talking out loud. What if you just sold it outright?
Right. Like,
And
what's that
you you've got your money, and then whatever the zoning allows, that's what the developer's, he's gonna most likely try to max out and get as much density as he can. That's what I'm looking at, is it better to look at it the other way, get your money today, and you're still gonna get the property taxes, you're still gonna get the sales taxes, and still gonna create the jobs.
I can give you at the risk of doing math in public and in my head, one example. Let's say that parcel C was going to have nothing but a hotel on it. The property values varied some, as I recall, around $5 million. So let's say, yeah, I think that's right. So assume you built a 500-room full-service hotel. The value per room key for that is $32,000 on at least a couple of the lots, and I have to look to be sure. So that's $16 million, and a lease yield of 4.5% would be something just under $800,000 per year. So it wouldn't take long for you to. It wouldn't take very many years to rent at that rate to exceed what we could have sold the property for.
Okay, let's, if there's not any more questions, I know Ben's got a second part yet.
All right. So I think this starts to drive towards what item number 7 on our agenda is as well, is what is the anticipated revenue for the board over the life of the 99 years for just the IDA parcels. Now, keep in mind that the TPAC parcel, so it's not 30 acres. It's a retraction from the parcel that was given to TPAC for development of that facility. So it's neighboring 26 acres instead of 30. So over the life of that, this is the anticipated income based on land uses, takedown schedule, those types of things, and which parcel they're on. And so this is kind of a generalized snapshot of what the development authority over the life of this 99 years anticipates at different milestones based on what we know from Fallon and what we know from the master development agreement on what the takedown, and Tom defined the takedown as when they start collecting rent themselves. And so when they get a certificate of occupancy and they start moving in that direction. And so this is the framework with which we will get our kind of funding stream that will allow us to operate as an agency, and will fund our operational moving forward. So I'll pause there and answer questions.
So, question. All right, just a reminder. So every parcel's been established by appraisal, and it's ticking up by the CPI.
Yes.
In the IDA. So that's just the master development agreement. That does not include the 40 to 60 acres of additional land that is left from Metro.
Okay, and then our estimate of rent collection is based on their completion of those estimated takedown targets. Okay, so it's just moving. It's a moving target completely.
Yeah, and based on their projections of what they're actually going to build, because the value of the properties vary based on the uses to which they could be put. So the product of the appraiser's work is per rentable square foot.
Okay, and then is there an outside date that they have to start?
They have to complete some milestones that relate to residential. They've given us a proposed takedown schedule, and I think that's Ben's next slide. They're not, I mean, market conditions change, so they're not locked in stone, but they do have to meet some milestones for residential completion.
Okay, so fast forward, is there a scenario where Metro would get the rights back to start this thing over on any parcel?
If they were so far out of bounds, that they weren't able to complete what the NDA contemplates, yeah, we would be heading in that direction.
Okay.
Any other questions before we move on? Awesome. Okay, well, I know next up on our agenda is another informational presentation on our 2027 operational expense.
Yeah. So just wanted to give you guys, the board, a update on where we are with our current operations budgets and where we stand. As you know, we requested $3 million as our operating funds. The way Metro does it, they send us dollars in tranches, not in a full, we received the $3 million on day one. And so we received $1 million at the beginning of the year, the fiscal year. And what you can see in the next slide, well, this was how we planned it out. This is what the operational uses were planned to be. We do currently have 4 staff. We are, as Michelle kind of mentioned a minute ago, we are in the process of hiring 2 additionals. One being an executive assistant, operation business office manager style role. As with the East Bank Development Authority and having such a small staff, you have the opportunity to make any job as big as you want it. And we have plenty of things to do that none of us anticipated. And so having additional hands to push is what we're looking at. And so a finance director, we're going to put that posting back out. We're looking for A-class team members, and making sure that the fit in the knowledge base is critical. And so just having knowledge base but not the fit, and having fit but not the knowledge base, is just not going to work, because this is hard, fast work. And so we want to make sure that it's the right people in the trenches with us. So moving to this year's budget, as you can see here, this is the spend through February. And so we're looking at, we have underspent our $1 million thus far. There are some things still in here that need to be adjusted. Metro has changed systems, and so putting all of our funds in the right spot, we're still working with them to make sure that all of our debts are being incurred in the right places and the right BUs. But that is starting to clean up. This is a snapshot in time, making sure that the right people are getting paid out of the right places, that Mr. Solomon and his professional services are being paid out of the right places. Developing a website is being paid out of the right place. And so making sure those operational things are occurring in the right spot. All of that to tell you that we're not getting to our $3 million budget this year. But with ramping up hiring, changing the way we're doing a lot of our professional services, we do anticipate keeping a similar budget. We met with Metro's Office of Budget just because we make a request to them for our operating expenses. We met with them and placed that request in front of them. We requested the same budget structure for this upcoming fiscal year. But we are additionally looking to add additional staff. So right now the plan is to have 6 staff if we are successful by the end of this fiscal year. But by the end of the next fiscal year, we'd like to add at least 2 additional staff. And we can walk you through kind of what the org structure looks like today. Which is this generalized organizational structure. With a small team, we all wear different hats, and sometimes we're in different roles, doing different responsibilities. The next fiscal year, these are additional staff that we look to add. There are additionals here. We're looking to be as flexible and mobile as we can, just like with the market conversation about what projects will start. Our needs as an agency will change. And so having a finance director with a procurement team under them looks to be critical. And so that's a staffing kind of line that we're looking to add kind of rapidly, and making sure we're getting A-class talent in that. And then if a corporate relocation were to occur on the East Bank, that would probably incur additional projects and spin up a lot faster. And so having those types of people for project management and delivery, looking to add that to our staffing level as well. And so we're building our staffing tree in this vein. And this is kind of our target to aim towards in our strategic plan on staff for the Development Authority, to make sure we're providing the right services to the agency. So I'll pause there and answer any questions.
Hey, Ben, just to clarify, so we have $2 million from this past year's Metro allocated budget unspent. Is that still available to us moving into next fiscal year? Are we requesting another $3 million, or how do those two
So the way
requests?
it works is we will get our $1 million, and so that $2 million basically evaporates. Yep. So we don't end up having debt that we have not spent. So it's not like we're incurring the $3 million debt and then another $3 million debt. It's, we will incur,
Whatever
let's
we
just call it $1
spend.
million, and then another
Once
3.
July 1 hits, that's the new.
So we'll get another tranche to cover our expenses, and then if we need another one, we'll just make that request up until our $3 million cap.
Great.
And nobody from finance has thrown anything at me, so I'm hoping I said that correctly.
Any other questions for Ben? Awesome, let's move on. Last item on the agenda is informational presentation on parks programming and Greenway framework.
All right, good morning, board. Ina Grider with the Development Authority. I'm not going to talk about finances or procurement. I'm going to talk about parks and greenways. So hopefully this will be a refreshing change of topic, but just another example of all the different pieces of work that's going into redeveloping the East Bank. I mentioned in a presentation I gave to the board last year that there was some work underway on a parks framework and Greenway Network plan. The work is nearing completion now, and I'd like to give this presentation prior to sharing a final draft with you. Hear any questions or discussion you have before we finalize. So this work is a piece of implementation and action item from Imagine East Bank, which set the high-level vision for redevelopment of land for parks and greenways. And it recommended further detail to take it from that high-level vision into actual alignments of greenways and park needs. You'll see throughout this presentation and in the document that the locations for parks and greenways are flexible based on how the East Bank develops, where projects occur, how quickly infrastructure is put in place. So there's flexibility, but there's also criteria that places any decision about individual parks or segments of greenway into the context of the broader open space system. What am I supposed to point this at? Okay. So the document has two pieces, a parks framework, which defines the types of parks and their general distribution, and a Greenway Network plan, which identifies feasible greenway alignments and how they integrate with planned pedestrian and bike networks. So we begin with looking at the existing gaps in park and greenway service on the East Bank. That's the areas in red, which are greater than a 5-minute walk from a park or greenway. So you can see from the graphics that Wasioto Park, the greenway in front of the stadium here and the grassy space, and then new greenway up at River North is really doing the heavy lift of providing parks and greenway space to the neighborhood. And given the scale and density we anticipate for the East Bank, having robust, well-planned parks and open space network to serve that future population is going to be critical. So to start with the parks framework, 3 criteria for determining park size, location, and recommended functions. I'm not going to go into detail on each of these in this presentation, but you'll see in the document the detail based on acres per resident, access level of service, and then the park typology. And we have a long methodology segment of the document, but the 5 park typologies for the East Bank are Signature Park, which is the large East Bank park planned where we're sitting today, a riverfront park that is along the length of the river, neighborhood parks, pocket parks, and then civic spaces. That they provide a wide range of meet a wide range of needs and have a wide range of functions, and additionally there'll be that ecological restoration and stormwater management piece to many of these as well. So for each of those 5 park typologies, the document has a number of pages that dig into a map with recommended locations, some precedent imagery showing design and program examples, and then case studies of where similar typologies have been successful elsewhere. So the document does that for each of the 5 park typologies, and then goes into more zoomed in by neighborhood to look at each neighborhood's future growth profile, current development plans, land ownership, and to show how each neighborhood can meet the goal of at least 3 park typologies in each neighborhood. And again, locations being flexible based on how the area redevelops. That leads into the big map of the preferred future, showing 120 acres of open space, 3.8 acres of park per 1,000 residents, at least 3 park types in each neighborhood, and meeting that access level of service for each neighborhood and overall for the East Bank. And then similarly, the Greenway had 3 criteria, access level of service again, which is within a 5-minute walk of a Greenway, Greenway continuity, so ensuring that we have a Greenway along the riverfront, and then connectivity, which is a minimum of 3 lateral connections into East Nashville. So how does the Greenway feel into the neighborhood surrounding it? So same page, same pages as you saw before in terms of mapping and precedents and case studies, and also the look at each by neighborhood, including areas, identifying areas where elevated boardwalks and alignments are a little more complicated than just being able to be built directly along the river. And then showing how that network provides 2.7 miles of connected riverfront, the lateral connections to East Nashville, and meeting the other Greenway criteria and goals for the East Bank. That creates this overall vision that creates the East Bank that's both beautiful and functional. And again, this is a framework intended to, be a reference. So as projects advance, we're able to discuss the needs of greenways and parks with those developers to create connected, accessible, and high-performing public realm on the East Bank. So that was a very quick summary of a much more lengthy document. In terms of next steps, we're working on completing the draft, which is at this point a lot of graphics and layout work. And we're also meeting with planning and parks and Metro Legal to discuss how the plan can be adopted and implemented. And then next steps would be in terms of, for each park space, more detail on programming, ensure we're not getting 10 dog parks and no swing sets, similar. And then being able to use this as a negotiation and a discussion with developers and property owners outside of the metro and land to ensure that we're establishing that network of open spaces for the public. That concludes my presentation.
Awesome, that was great. Any questions?
Yes, I have one. And this is amazing, but I am thinking about the safety. Do we have any safety barriers going up where the river is and anything like that? Have you been thinking about that?
In terms of fencing along the river, is that your question?
Yes, ma'am. Because I'm just thinking outside the box. Like, say you take your kid down there and you're having a picnic, or you spending time with family, and a child gets away. You don't want your child to be wandering into the river, and stuff like that. So I'm just thinking outside the box.
Yeah, no, and I think that, again, is kind of those layers of detail that we're moving into. The vision plan was very high level. This provides more detail, and then working with parks and other examples of safe safe greenways, safety along the river will be critical. We do have a very steep, overgrown riverbank at the moment on this side of the river, and so working with our public safety and emergency services and parks and greenways to work on lighting, safety. We definitely don't want to be pursuing anything that would put anybody at risk. It's to be enjoyed and a form of transportation, alternative transportation as well.
Just got a question. Can you remind me who's been at the table developing this vision, this master agreement, and what kind of community input has been received?
Yeah. So obviously starting out of Imagine East Bank, which we've talked about the engagement there. This work was done with HTLA and then primarily with Planning Department. It's a partnership between the Development Authority and Planning to do this work. And then we've met with the Greenways Commission and Greenways for Nashville, who will also receive a draft of the document for comments, and Friends of Shelby Park. So primarily it's been sort of folks engaged in the operation of parks and greenway spaces in the city today.
Hannah, first of all, just really excited to see this. And I think having this fleshed out vision document will just go so far in showing Nashvillians that this is really a place for them and places that are accessible and can get everywhere. Could you go back to the existing Parks Gap map for a second? So since we are talking about big visionary documents, I wanted to ask this question. Where the Parks Gap is, are we doing any feasibility analysis over capping the interstate and turning it into a park and open space? There's a lot of precedents in other cities. Dallas comes to mind where they've been able to do this successfully. And just curious at this stage, since we are talking big vision, really mitigating the interstate as a barrier to other neighborhoods in East Nashville. I myself walked from my house today. And I think as long as we have interstate ramps that are crossing pedestrian connections there, we won't really fully realize the opportunity for the East Bank to be bikeable, walkable, multimodal. So yeah, curious as we're thinking about just big picture, open space investments, is that on the table right now?
Yeah, great question. And I did want to note that this, as with everything East Bank, is dated already because this gap map doesn't show Oracle's open space plan, nor does it show East Bend that's going through the rezoning process today. So again, another living document. And so the gaps are going to look different once we add in those developments and the public facing pieces of that. We also are showing the updated network with the lowering of James Robertson Parkway and the extension of Marine Drive into East Nashville. So there, when I mentioned about it not being complete, is because we have some graphics that need to be updated based on new developments. So there are additional connections to East Nashville coming in the works, particularly up in River North. We aren't currently, as the Development Authority, studying a cap on the interstate, but Imagine East Bank outlined a number of ways to improve the existing connections we have to East Nashville from a multimodal perspective, and bringing James Robertson down to grade is a big part of that. But working with TDOT even through existing conditions of under the interstate on Woodland, under the interstate on James Robertson, how we can make some more tactical urbanism type attempts at showing how that can be a more pleasant experience is where we're probably going to begin that work.
Any more questions? Awesome. So we covered a lot today, from finance and budget and contracts and design. And it just speaks to how much work the staff is currently doing. So first, I want to say thank you. Second, it's going to be a very busy year, it looks like. And third, I think that going forward, I know somebody mentioned like a conversation about committees and things like that. So as you guys continue to look at that balance between staffing and needing support for all of the great work that you're doing, we may need to revisit how we can continue to support you guys and all of our different levels of expertise on committees to help while we're in all of our different swim lanes. Any more questions?
Yeah, but just follow up. Ben, I know to her point, there's a lot of moving targets. Could we get a schedule with some benchmark dates of, like, you know, when the Titan Stadium is going to open, when the stadium's going to be torn down, when the East Bank Boulevard is going to be built, the outside dates of when Fallon has to develop or they give it back to us? Just in general terms, it'd be really good to a reference point for us to have, because we talk about it today, then we won't talk about it for 4 or 5 months.
So Jim's going to find this out right now. I'm going to ask HDR to do a quarterly report, as April will be the end of the first quarter. And so as part of that conversation, our comms team, Carrie Hayes, who's been leading that, has been working on a graphic that kind of clearly lays out a very complicated and spaghetti bowl mess of a schedule. And trying to lay that out in a way that's very palatable and discernible and kind of lays in the major milestones. And so we'll bring that and have a quarterly, and we'll kind of lay in some of the layers of the strategic conversation as well, so that the board can better see what's the 12-month roadmap on things like design and construction and those kinds of decision points that would be in your kind of court in the next calendar year.
Awesome. So I do want to make a note for a second that we all have binders for the first time. And I both love these and hate them, because I think that it helps us to understand a little bit more and I forget terminologies a lot. So to be able to be a little bit more on topic, we could probably have the schedule in the back here. Ben let me know that each one of these tabs are aligned with the agenda item. So agenda item number 2 is tab number 2, et cetera. We're probably scribbling in these, but we're going to give them all back to you at the end of the meeting. Is that? Yeah. Yes.
Feel free to take anything that's in it. We would just ask, we can refill it for next board meeting if you would like. That would be great.
And with that, I guess that we are all ready to close out. Is there a formal way that I'm supposed to close the meeting now?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Do we have to vote on that? We just adjourn. All right. Y'all have a great day.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.